Well, there was a request a few weeks ago sent to me asking if I would come back and spend some time on this topic. And had a few sermons we were working on before, but we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about faith and family roles today. Matthew 19:4 through 6 is actually one of my favorite passages. And this really needs to be a regular topic. And the reason is if we go back and we begin to look at the statistics within the church, we would find that divorce and family issues are still issues within the family of God. Now, actually this morning, Larry had asked me if I would go back and spend some time talking about Christian families and Christian marriages as opposed to worldly marriages. And I think that's a good idea for me to go back and spend some time. Here's the part that might be a little shocking to you. We can go back and spend some time on what the Bible teaches regarding these things, and we'll look at some of this today. You might be a little shocked as far as some of these statistics as what we find within the church as opposed to those who are not Christians. And in many of those areas, the statistics are not very good. But with all of that being said, as we begin to talk about faith and we begin to talk about family and the roles within the family, we often expect for the Christian's marriage to be a whole lot bigger and better and much more well-functioning than what we find within our secular relationships. And for those who are followers of God, I mean, here's the question really. Shouldn't the Christians' homes be peaceful and well-ordered, characterized by constant harmony within the household and within the family? It being really a spiritual atmosphere in which in all of those relationships and within the home, we have pure motives and financial stability. You would hope that's what you would find as you begin to talk about the Christian home and the Christian home's makeup. But if we're going to be honest, and if we're going to actually acknowledge the truth openly, or maybe we just worry about it secretly within ourselves, I think the majority of us would come back and say, our actual marriages actually do not measure up to the ideal picture given within the Scriptures, or there are areas that we as whatever we are within that role, whether we're husbands, whether we're wives, whether we're fathers, mothers, whatever it might be, that we're not really fulfilling to the extent that we could the role. Now, the Bible has an awful lot to say about our roles within our families, specifically whether we're husbands or wives, whether we're fathers, mothers, parents, children, whatever it may be. Excuse me. Even for those of us who are married as opposed to those who may not yet be married. And I do want to say this. For those of you who are not yet married, you can understand what it says on a piece of paper as far as being a husband or a wife, and you can understand what it says on a piece of paper about being a father or a mother. But you cannot fully understand, and this will not fully make sense to you, not fully, until you've actually experienced it. Okay, and I think the majority of us would say that from experience. I had no idea what I was getting into when I got married, and neither did the rest of you. Right? We thought it would all be perfect and we'd work it all out. It does. You can understand it on paper, but you can't fully understand it until you do it. So take with a grain of salt what I'm telling you. It is correct. And you can understand it, but you can't fully grasp and understand it until you've put it into action. Let's start off talking for a little bit about the biblical expectations of the husband. Now, remember, many of the things I'm going to tell you are not things you see in secular society. You're not seeing many of these things in the relationships for those who are not Christians, or at least not living as faithful Christians. Let's start off with the most very basic fundamental regarding husbands and the way in which they treat their wives. Husbands are to fully, wholeheartedly, in a way that you can't explain, love their wives. I'm going to go over to Ephesians 5:25. I'll try to follow my outline pretty good. But Ephesians 5:25 through 29. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it. And let me pause for a minute. That is the expression and the extent to which a husband is to love his wife. My wife and I were listening to Bryan Adams yesterday, and we were talking about Bryan Adams. There's a current song on the radio about a guy jumping on a grenade for whoever his love interest was. And I jokingly said, he was saying I would catch your grenade for you. Do you guys know the song I'm talking about? And I said I'd catch it, but I'm going to throw it, right? I'm not going to keep it. What he's explaining here is that Bryan Adams / I'd catch a grenade for you type of love that we're talking about. I know that's an unusual... That's not something that the majority of people actually think and or understand. And like I said, there are an awful lot of people who don't love their spouses this way. He starts off talking about how much Christ loved the church, and he says this is what you as husbands are expected to do for your wives. Verse 26, it says that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. All right, there's a standard right there that husbands have been held up to, and I'm going to say every one of us is going to have to admit we have not met that standard. Not to the extent that we've been told. Part of it is because we don't even fully grasp and comprehend that when we enter into this marriage bond, okay? We're to love our wives to the same extent that Jesus loved the church and gave himself for it. And he says it this way, you're to love your wife as your own body, nourishing and cherishing them. Well, let's take it back to the standard. Christian husbands are to be totally different than what we see as far as husbands in the world. And that's because part of the reason is we look at our spouses as those who are going to help us get to heaven. Not only is my wife my spouse, she's a sister in Christ. And the same thing for the wives. He's not just your husband, he is your brother in Christ. And we've talked about this before. When I get to heaven, I'm not going to be married to my wife anymore. But the goal is for both of us to get there. That relationship will not exist in heaven, not like it does here. And so as we begin to look at our spouses, and he begins to explain this type of love, we're talking about a partner in both of us trying to make it to the same place, to get to heaven. Again, notice the command in Ephesians 5:25, told to love their wives, to love our wife, not plurality like we see in other religious groups, but Christian men need to love their wives. I think there's a reason, and I've touched on this before. In my experience, when a man loves his wife the way that the Bible tells him to love his wife, she will naturally respond back to that. I believe wholeheartedly, and I think I have seen it play out that way, that when a wife is treated by her husband as the Bible teaches she is to be treated, there is little chance that her needs and or desires are not being met. And I don't care if you're struggling financially, if that relationship is strong because you're both treating your spouses the way that you should. Things like financial stress, things like whatever the world can throw at you, that's not going to tear you apart. But if you're not being treated the way that you need to be treated, if a wife's not being loved the way that Jesus says we're to love our wives, oftentimes that's when problems become apparent in the marriage. And I will say this, oftentimes when there are problems in the marriage, it is because the husband is not loving his wife the way that Jesus tells the husband to love his wife. I think very few women would be willingly leaving relationships if they were being loved like this. Same thing goes for husbands who are leaving the relationship. Many wives today, and this actually goes for husbands, they are married, they live within the same house, and yet one and or both of them feel alone. And that is not what either spouse envisioned before they got married. And it occurs for a number of different reasons. But I don't know where you're at, but I do know many women who, primarily it's more on the women's side, I'll be honest, that I've spoken to, where they're married, they live in the same house, they feel like they're alone. And it could be for a number of reasons. It could be because the husband is working so many hours outside the house. It could be because he's so involved in other activities, hobbies, whatever it may be. But it occurs for both. But that's not what God expected for the spousal relationship. He expected for husbands to love their wives in a way that is almost impossible to explain. The only way you could explain it is to say you need to love them to the extent that Jesus loved the church. We are to leave father and mother. I'm going to go over to Ephesians 5:31. Now, again, this is being quoted by Paul, but he's quoting from Genesis 2:24. It says, "For this cause shall man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh." The husband leaves the home unit he's in, and he begins to create his own home unit. And so the husband gives priority to his wife, the wife gives priority to her husband over everything else, over their parents, and later, and this is oftentimes difficult, even over their children. And certainly over their friends, certainly over their hobbies, certainly over their careers, whatever that is. Now granted, again, there will be times when one or both of them will be busy providing for family or working. But here's the point: for the husband to love his wife the way Jesus is talking about here, the wife has to have priority. She needs to know that, and she needs to feel that on a daily basis. And there is a difference between the way a Christian thinks and the way a non-Christian thinks regarding this, okay? When I got married, I was not a Christian, and I don't recall exactly, but I do believe, I think I made it known. My wife, I guess, can nod her head. Did I at some point state that if things didn't work out or if you didn't meet my criteria, I would just leave? I see the head nod. That is not the way a Christian thinks. I wasn't a Christian. And I didn't understand at that point, guys, as I've told you before, I didn't understand what love was. I was of a worldly mindset, not a Christian mindset. Now, I said before, if my wife leaves, I'm going with her. I don't care. I'll pack my stuff and follow her. She's not leaving, right? And I'm not leaving either. The way the world thinks is not the way Christians think. We are taught very clearly about this relationship. There is a leaving and a cleaving that takes place. The spouse has to have priority over everything. They need to know it, they need to understand it, they need to feel it. For the non-Christian, statistics show that is not the case, okay? Again, as part of this love, we are told we're not to be harsh towards our wives. Listen to Colossians 3:19. "Husbands, love your wives. Be not bitter against them." Now, if you go back and look up that word, "be not bitter," it literally says, do not make them bitter or do not embitter them. That is the idea. So let me ask this question, at least for the men who are here, and I guess it would go for the ladies who are married. Men, how do you treat your bride? And brides, how do you treat your husband? Most of you have probably known it. I have known many marriages where the husband was constantly putting down the wife. I have seen within the church relationships where the wife was constantly berating and putting down the husband, and it creates friction. I won't tell you who this is or where it is, but I know a Christian man who has all the qualifications to be an elder. Very good man, and I have never seen anyone so beat down by his wife that he literally hangs his head and walks around like a dog that's been beat. That shouldn't be for either spouse, and I have seen that within the church. I told someone at work the other day, some of the meanest people I've ever met are Christians. And some of those are husbands and wives. And if you guys have never met people like that, it's true. That's not how it's designed to be, and that's not how it should be, okay? Husbands are to be extremely understanding with their spouse, and part of the reason is we give honor and understanding to our wives because of their makeup. Listen to 1 Peter 3:7, and I will say this because some people are going to watch this sermon and they're not going to agree with what I'm going to say here, and some are not going to understand it. I'm just giving you the standard, okay? And what it says is correct. Listen to 1 Peter 3:7. "Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered." Let me put it a little bit differently. The way that I, as a husband, am to deal with my wife is totally different than how I would deal with a male. And we're beginning to talk here as he points out about wives and how they deal with their wives. we need to understand something about our wives is they have a delicate nature, much more delicate than we as males have. They have strength in areas that we do not. My wife can do things I can't do, and she looks at things in a way that I cannot look at them. And sometimes it takes that for her to straighten me up and get me to look at it from a different aspect. I have to understand my wife has a delicate nature that I don't possess. Each of our wives, for us who are husbands here, need to understand that. They're naturally designed to be caretakers, and one of the things about women is they are naturally designed to consider the emotions of everybody. And if you don't think that's true, you put a bunch of ladies together and they begin to talk about things, and they're going to talk. You can put two guys in the garage working on a set of brakes or something, and they could probably go for an hour and a half without saying a word to each other, because they don't reach that level of intimacy that women do. Women are natural caretakers, considering the emotions and feelings of others. And there's something to be said about that feminine nature, okay? The natural feminine nature should be encouraged. It should be relished. It should be valued by our husband. And if I'm going to speak truth, I would say for each of us here who are men, who are married, in reality, that's probably what drew us to our wives in the first place. That is probably what attracted us to them. It is that delicate feminine nature. Now, I have to say this, there is a serious attack on both masculinity and femininity today. And those qualities are not only both natural, they are necessary for anyone to carry out their function of the role within the marriage bond and within the family. And I know there are people saying, I can't believe you would even try to designate characteristics between feminine and masculinity. The statistics show that when we do not carry those out, it creates havoc, not only within the family, but within the marriage bond. And I think when I come back and work on the lesson that Larry has asked about, we're going to point some more of those out. There has to be defined roles within the marriage bond regarding the husband and the wife. And the femininity and the masculinity present in both of those roles is mandated and necessary. And if you remove that from either one, I'm going to tell you right now, you will have a dysfunctional marriage, at least in some area. And certainly some dysfunctional problems within the family. So let me move now from the father and the husband, or from the husband to actually talking a little bit about the role as a father. If you are married and you are blessed enough to have children, you naturally automatically become a father. And there is a biblical mandate for you as to how you are to carry that role out. The same as in the Bible talking about how we deal with our wives, our spouses. Let's go over to 1 Timothy 5:8. I want to start with one of the basics. Now, this used to be much more promoted and basic than it is today in some regards. It says, "But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." I don't want to be described as a follower of God and have someone say that I'm worse than the pagans because I'm not taking care of my family. But Paul makes it very clear that if a person is not taking care of their family, they are worse than an infidel or a pagan. That's part of what we do as fathers. That is part of, and for many of us, that's just our natural ingrained. That's our natural ingrained desire. It is, guys. Oftentimes we want to fix problems and we're doers, right? That's part of what makes us up. The wife also has a portion in this. Listen to 2 Corinthians 12:14. "Behold, the third time I am ready to come to you, and will not be burdensome to you, for I seek not yours, but you. For the children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children." Both parents are providers for their children, but the husband has often been positioned in a place where he is the one who is providing for the household. Okay? A man who fails to do that is worse than an infidel. Now, I didn't go back and spend a lot of time. I will on the next sermon, but did you guys know that fatherless families are 4 times more likely to live in poverty than for married couple families? So if a family does not have a father present in the home, they are 4 times more likely to live in poverty. And that shouldn't surprise you because that's what we found in history. In years past, if there was not a father present in the home, they very likely were living in poverty. Okay? We learn from the twin epistles over in Ephesians 6:4 and Colossians 3:21, the father is also not to provoke the children to wrath. Part of his providing for the family is also providing for their upbringing, and part of that is not pushing them to the point where they begin to get angry. Ephesians 6:4, and ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but notice this, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. How would we provoke to wrath? We can do it in a number of ways. We can do it through unreasonable commands, being needlessly harsh and severe. What I mean is over-punishing as related to whatever it is they've done wrong. And for those of us who are parents, yes, your kids are going to do wrong. And we know when we were kids, we did wrong, right? And I'll say every time I got a beating coming, I had it coming, right? We'll touch on that. You can't be over-severe, and yet there needs to be discipline. Okay? And so that's part of the father bringing up his children, is to not push them to that point and not to continually find fault with every single thing they do, because at that point they begin to lose courage and confidence, and they may think that they can never please us. We don't want our children to be to that extent. We want our kids to understand our expectations and to realize that we realize they're going to make mistakes. Our goal is for them to, when they make a mistake, realize it, learn from it, and not do it again. Right? But we can't continue to break them down to where they feel like they can never please us. Ephesians 6:4, as I just read, says, bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Let me point something out to you. It is not the church's responsibility to educate your children. Worship and Bible study are supplementary. They should already, what I'm telling you now, they should already know. I'm just reminding them. Right? I don't think the majority of people look at it that way. They look at the education system within the church, and they look at worship, and they think, how much did my children learn? That is the wrong mindset. This is supplementary, especially when they're not yet Christians. They're sitting in the assembly watching us worship the way the Bible teaches us to worship and listening to Bible study. This is supplementary. They should be learning all this at home. And for those of us who maybe grew up not as Christians, we didn't get this. And as I've said before, it is hard to do right when you don't know right. So as parents, don't look at the church as it's the church's responsibility to teach my children. No, it's not. It's the parents' responsibility. Part of that responsibility, again, is not only teaching them, but when they fall short of those standards, is to correct them. Proverbs 13:24, he that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes. That word actually means quickly. He that loveth him chastens him quickly. I don't think I ever thought back as a child when I was getting in trouble for the things I had done. Man, I see how much my dad truly loves me as he's chasing me, getting ready to whoop on me because I did this or that. Right? I didn't see that at the time. Looking back, not only do I realize he was correct, he was showing me in those situations that he did love me. Right? They're not going to see it at the time. I'm telling you, for the younger ones here, I said you can't always understand it till you've seen it. When you become a parent, you'll know then. But our children need to know when they haven't met the necessary requirements. They need to know as quickly as possible to get them to make that correction and get them back on track. Another statistic, 70% of juveniles in state-operated institutions come from single-parent homes. And of those homes, would you guys know that 80% of single-parent homes, the female is the one with the custody of the child? And so, what's the point? Many of these children who are in single-family homes, they're not spending adequate time with their parents, and so they're either spending time with their friends, they're spending time with on the streets, they're spending time in gangs, they're spending time in other places, they're involved in things. Not only do their parents not know about it, the parents really aren't there to correct and fix many of these things. And so it is very sad that these children being raised today in single-family home units statistically are struggling compared to those who are in family units with both parents. And that's a proven statistic. Single-family stable marriages with both a husband and a father statistically fare much, much better than those who have just a mother or just a father. So part of that requirement for the husband is to love his wife, to demonstrate that love. If you're a husband, if you're loving your wife the way you should be, your son knows how to treat his future spouse, and your daughter knows how she should be treated. That's our goal as husbands. Teach our daughters and our sons how they are to love and to be loved. And for us as husbands who are also fathers, we're teaching our children how to raise their own children. And again, you cannot remove, I know this society wants to, you cannot remove the masculinity traits from the father and the husband and think that he will be respected. It will not. And again, this may not be common, and they may not like this on social media today when they watch this, but it's true. It's always been true. It will continue to be true. Let's talk a little bit about biblical expectations of the wife. Now again, this probably will not fare well on social media. None of this is my opinion, guys. I'm just reading the verses and telling you, and I'm giving you some statistics in society. This isn't my opinion. I'm just plagiarizing and quoting to you what the Bible already teaches. The world may not like it. As Christians, we need to accept it and understand it. Going over to Ephesians 5:22, we learn as we begin to talk about the wife, wives are to submit themselves to their husbands. And I see people are probably cringing right now on social media as they watch this lesson. I can't believe he just said, I know a gentleman who actually got married and his wife said, I do not want that word within my marriage ceremony. And here's the sad part. I'm not going to go back and read all the passages. You know, there's mutual submission in marriage. There's mutual submission within marriage. But part of that is wives submitting to their husbands. Listen to Ephesians 5:22. I'll read down to verse 24. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. And therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. I actually was talking to Russell the other day at a machine, and I was talking about how Abraham's wife called him Lord and Master, and I said, my wife never calls me that. He was laughing. And the point is not for her to call me Lord and Master. I would never ask that. But there was submission within that relationship, and it made Russell laugh. There was submission within that marriage relationship. The marriage relationship involves submission. It actually involves mutual submission. And just as the church is submissive to Christ, wives are to be submissive and respect and love their husbands. I don't think for a second that being submissive to Christ makes me inferior or weak. And neither does a wife being submissive to her husband make her inferior or weak. But there are roles given within the relationship, and part of that, again, as I've said, there's mutual submission, is the wife being submissive to her husband. You can write down Ephesians 5:33 and Titus 2:4. But remember this, before we go any further. The husband is told to love his wife. He's told how to love his wife. He's told to love his wife the same way that Christ loved the church. And I will tell you this, if he is not doing his part, it is going to be extremely difficult for his wife to be submissive to him, to respect him, or to look at him as the husband that he should be when she sees the husband that he actually is. And many wives are not going to submit to a man who will not love them the way that they're supposed to be loved. If a husband loves his wife the way that he's supposed to, her natural response will be in subjection to him because she knows everything that he's doing is for my benefit. He's doing it for me, on behalf of me, and none of what he is doing is for himself. He's thinking about the marriage unit, and he's thinking about the family unit. And that's why he's making these decisions. She knows he loves her. She knows he's making the best decisions on her behalf. And husbands need to be taught to be leaders in the home and in the marriage. It needs to be taught because culture today is not teaching that. I don't watch any TV really anymore at all. But you think about any sitcom that's on TV and you think about the marriage unit that's portrayed on that sitcom. Husbands are normally portrayed as moronic, dumb, and oftentimes the same for wives. There is no good examples of marriage on TV anymore. You go back and you think about some of the marriages we used to have portrayed on TV. I used to give the example of the Cosby Show. He always played a very good husband, and there was a good relationship between them. I don't think I would use that as an example anymore. Go back to some of those old sitcoms, though, and you see many of those relationships that were modeled for us. We don't get that anymore. What we are shown now on TV is dysfunctional as can be. And the relationship between the husband and the husband being the leader. And I've actually gone around and asked. I've taken my own poll, and I have asked, because I work in a manufacturing environment, and there are a lot of ladies in there, and I've said, let me ask you a question. If your husband could make enough money for you to no longer come here and work every day, where you could stay home, take care of your children, take care of the house, provide for them that way, would you do it? Almost every single one of them said, absolutely. I don't want to be in here. I don't want to be in here. So I know the polls and culture will say something different, but on my experience, that's what I have found. And so as you begin to talk about the wife carrying out her role, again, she has a feminine nature. She is built different than the husband. Both the husband and the wife are to consider each other, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, and I'll be careful how I word it. They're to consider each other's needs regarding intimacy. If you go over to 1 Corinthians 7, 4 through 5, it says, the wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband. That's true. This week my wife had me putting parts on my daughter's car, right? She didn't have power. You're going to do that. We're not talking about those types of things. But my point is this. There are certain things, and he's going to go on, there are certain things that we need to do within the relationship to fulfill the needs of the other person. Here, he's talking about intimately. And he says, the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. Here he's talking about marriage. We are about intimacy within marriage. We get that this is not only, and in context, that's what he's talking about here. We get that we use our bodies within the marriage to fulfill different needs. My wife takes care of a number of things that I don't do. I take care of a number of things that she doesn't do. And sometimes she just has to say that needs to be done, and I do it. And same for her. And part of that also pertains to intimacy within the marriage bond. Okay? And that varies from marriage to marriage and so forth. But the point is this, both spouses submit themselves. I talked about there being mutual submission. They submit themselves intimately to each other as needed. And they also do that in other areas within the marriage bond. Now let's talk about for just a second. We've touched just for a little bit about being a spouse. Guys, we're barely touching the hem of the garment, right? Just barely focusing on a little bit about husbands and fathers, about wives, and now if they're blessed enough to have children. And I'm going to tell you what, you don't understand what it's like to be a wife until you become a wife, and you don't understand what it's like to become a mother until you become a mother. And I actually saw this play out not too long ago. Like fathers, mothers again are to love their children. Titus 2:4. That they may teach the young women to be sober. Notice this. That they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children. Let that sink in for a minute. The older women are going to teach the younger women how to love their husbands. Guys, we're not talking about physical love here. That comes naturally. We understand that. We're talking about a type of love that goes beyond that portion of the love. The older women will teach the younger women how to truly love their husbands. What does that all entail? How is that carried out? Remember I said earlier that a father and husband's teaching his daughter and son how to love and to be loved. And it's the same thing for a Christian wife and mother. She is teaching her children how to love and to be loved, and she's teaching them how to raise their children. This type of love that we're talking about here, it's something that needs to be taught. It's a learned process. And that's again why people who are raised in dysfunctional families or families that are missing one of the parents don't truly know how to carry out their role. And again, it's understandable. It's hard to do right and know how to be a faithful husband and or mother or father and so forth when you've never seen it carried out. Again, it goes back to the statistics. The statistics show that a family with both mother and husband do better. Now, is that always the case? No, it's not. It should be. The wife and mother is to manage the household. Titus 2:5. I'm going to go over to 1 Timothy 5:14. Paul says, I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. It's interesting, if you go look up that word guide the house, it actually means for the one who is the householder. You guys ever hear someone refer to their wife as the queen of the domain, right? The queen of the house or whatever it may be. Sometimes my wife will say, hey, can you do me a favor and put a nail in and hang this up here? I don't care if it hangs there, but my wife wants it there, and I'm fine with that, right? However she wants the house, that's how our house is going to look. If my wife wants to paint the walls pink in the bedroom, whatever, I don't care. Right? But I do need to make sure all my stuff's all lined up out in the barn or the garage. Right? I care about the house. That's their domain. I don't understand why, but women are naturally, as far as the ones who do a good job in being the householders, the house maintainers. They keep everything in order. And there's a reason why that makes sense to me. If you go back and look, who's normally out working to feed the family and provide for the house? It was always the husband, and it quite often still is now. So who did that leave at home? To run everything else. The wife. Guys, when I grew up, when I was really young, my mom worked. We left the city and moved back to the farm when I was 10 or 11, something like that. And at that point, my mom sold her business and stayed home. My mom ran the show because my dad wasn't there. He was at work, right? He's either out in the field working or he's at work working. My mom ran everything. She was the householder, and I'd say many of you are like that. That's designed that way for a reason. When you begin to think how the family is designed, when the husband is gone, he's out working, ideally the wife is there, and she's the one who is managing control of the house. That's the primary responsibility of the wife and the mother, and I've had people throw fits about that and say, well, you know, the wife should be home. Maybe the wife needs to work. And I've had people say that the wife shouldn't work at all. And I'm not going to go back and break that down, but if you go over to Proverbs 31, we talk about the Proverbs 31 wife. Here's what I will say. She placed her home as her primary concern, and then she went out and worked on the side. Okay? Let's remember this and be very careful, because I actually watched a gentleman not too long ago preach a lesson about how women, it was wrong and sinful for women to work. Let me point something out to you. There may be a number of reasons why there may not be a husband in the home. He could be traveling. He could be dead, right? Maybe he left her. There could be a number of reasons where a woman is forced to fill two roles within the family, and part of that is actually out working. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of households where the woman is the only one in the house, and that's because, and if you guys don't know this, you guys know who normally gets possession of the children? It's the wife. It's almost always the wife. And so in the case of a divorce, she's usually the one with the child. And I hate to even bring this up. I'm not going to go back. This is obviously not my lesson. And then you've got a husband who's paying his $35 to $100 a week or whatever, and he thinks he's taking care of his children. Right? The wife is barely getting by. She's working nonstop. She's not home, and the father's not doing his job to pay to help raise these children up. And guys, that is common. I hear about it all the time at work. That's not how it should be. Not in an ideal world. And from what I've found and the people I've talked to, that's not what they want. I've asked the ladies, would you want to stay home? Of course. And here's where I saw it play out recently. We know for a fact that being a mother in today's society is actually one of the most overlooked occupations. Many look down at stay-at-home moms. I won't say who this is, but if they watch my lessons, they'll know. I work with a lady who just recently had a child right before the end of the year. And she had talked about, working, how she was going to work and how she was going to take care of her child after the baby was born. First-time mother, right? First day back to work, she came into her office, and I went down there and I said, let me ask you a question. You glad to be back to work, or do you want to be home? And she said, I don't want to come back. I don't want to come back. I want to stay home and take care of my child. Remember I said earlier, you can understand it, but you can't really understand it until it happens? I've seen a huge change in the way that she looks at her position as a wife and a mother. I think before she looked at it as I'm a wife and a mother who works and I now have a child. Now she looks at herself as a wife and a mother who has to work outside the home. And it's not what she wants. It's not what she wants. Like the father, the mother also has to provide spiritual training. 2 Timothy 1:5, Paul says, "When I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that is in thee also." So we know Timothy's mother and grandmother were believers. It appears the father may not have been, which is all too often the case today. Never underestimate the effect that a mother can have spiritually on her children. And let me say this, never underestimate the effect that a spouse can have on their spouse, or that a bride can have on her husband. Right? I became a Christian before my wife, but I would have never become a Christian without my wife, because I was the one that used to mock her and make fun of her. Don't underestimate the value of whatever your role is and wherever you are. There's a lot to be expected of wives and mothers, and much of that is teaching their children. And we see that here as Paul talks about Timothy's mother and grandmother. They must have been amazing. Let's talk about children for a little bit. Guys, we're barely touching the hem of the garment. There is so much expected of husbands and fathers and mothers and wives that each one of these points really needs its own entire lesson. Let's focus on the children for a little bit. Children are to obey their parents. Colossians 3:20, "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord." Well, for those of us who are parents, we understand this. Children are just trying to learn to be independent. And they make an awful lot of bad decisions. And for every one of us who's now grown, we know that because we made those decisions. And we thought to ourselves, I wonder if my mom and dad know what I just did. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes they do. They're trying to be independent. They're trying to figure it out. And yet they still need their parents. And they need to obey their parents. And he literally says, "For this is well-pleasing unto the Lord." Now, of course, I will say this, the commands of the Bible go before any commands of parents. And so for those of you who maybe either are very young Christians or you maybe not yet even obeyed the gospel, if your parents were to ask you to do something that is not scriptural, you do what the commands of God state prior to what your parents state. Same thing for spouses. If I came home and told my wife, "Hey, I forbid you to go to church," guess what she's going to tell me? "I don't really care what you command me to do. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to church." And that should be the same case for any child whose parents might tell them to do something that is unscriptural, that's sinful. Children are to honor their parents. Ephesians 6:2-3. "Honor thy father and mother, which is thy first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee and that thou mayest live long on the earth." Now this may be by helping their parents as they get up in years. My daughter was kind enough to tell me that if my wife passes before me, she would come pick me up at the retirement center and drive me here to preach. How loving of her. I was like, "Just let me live in my house. I'll give you my house if you just let me live in the room back there." We may need to take care of our parents as they get older. And I think back to Larry taking care of his mom and some of the funny things that happened. And I can also remember you guys would switch back and forth because it's a lot to take care of an aging parent, isn't it? And I have said this before. Somebody was complaining at work about their child who was in diapers. And I said, here's the funny thing. It's going to be you and me pretty soon. We start off in diapers and we end up in diapers. And guess what? Somebody's got to take care of us. And children, it's probably going to be you. And for my parents, it might be me. Now, you may say this, and I won't spend much more time on children. It's pretty simple. Do what the Bible teaches, first and foremost, and obey your parents. The reason is because your parents have been there, they've done it, they know what doesn't work because they tried it. And it's funny because children always wonder, I wonder how my parents knew that I was doing that. Because we've been there and done the same thing, and we thought our parents didn't know. Your parents love you. They're trying to teach you to not do the same dumb things they did before. Now let's talk for just a few minutes about the unmarried. There is biblical expectations for the unmarried. Culture today doesn't like it. They reject it, and they don't want any part really of hearing about it. I will say this: if you're above the age of legally being able to be married and you're not yet married, there's a lot of stress that comes with that. I think the majority of both men and women want to be married, and I think they look forward to that. And you may say it's not yet happened. Where exactly do I fit into this? Well, let me say this first. Although it may not be where you want to be exactly at this point, enjoy for what little time you have the years of being single. Listen to 1 Corinthians 7:32. Now, Paul describes there's differences between being single and being married. Your focus is different, and you have that ability at least for a time. Paul says, "But I would have you without carelessness, without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. There's difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely, and that ye may attend upon the Lord without distraction." If you're not yet married, you still need to have a focus on everything that pertains to the Christian faith, while at the same time you're looking for a spouse that's going to meet all of those requirements, that's going to help you to still be a good Christian, to be a good husband or a good wife, a good father, a good mother. You've got plenty of time to focus on the Lord and the teachings of the Lord, and to focus on just your faith as a whole, while you're looking for that person who's going to be an heir in life together with you as you try to make it to heaven. And that may not be very comforting to you. What I'm saying is you'll probably forget an awful lot about the time at which you were not married once you get married. And I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but so I've known my wife since she was 16. She didn't have a driver's license, 16. I've been with my wife longer than I've been without my wife. I can't even comprehend the idea of not being together. I don't remember, or at least not with gladness, I don't remember the unmarried years. For those of you who are not married, who are still waiting for your future spouse, this time behind you will eventually be gone. Enjoy this time for what it is, and realize that this is a time in which you can focus more on the things of God before you have all the other distractions in your life. I will also want to say this. The fact that you're not married creates an awful lot of trials and temptations in your life. Many who are not yet married want the benefits of marriage. I don't know a better way to say it than that. Culture promotes it. You can look around and see the unmarried living together, and maybe they would say playing house. I actually had somebody say, "Well, we're not ready to get married yet, but we'd like to try it out for a while." Yeah. No, I don't think so. We're not going to play house. When it gets to that point, if you're to the point where you want to play house, you need to actually start your own family and get married, because at that point there's no going back. You need to make that decision and know it. But there's a need for, unfortunately, the majority of the world around us to be taught, because they look at this as like it's normal. It's not. The benefits of marriage will come when you're in the position to enjoy those benefits of marriage. Let's talk for just a second about the individual within the family unit. And I have to break it down like this I'm almost done, guys. Real quick. We can be husbands and we can be fathers. And we can be wives and we can be mothers. And we can be children. But we need to remember we're not just husbands and wives, and we're not just mothers, or husbands and wives and mothers and fathers. We're actually individuals. And we have to remember that within the role within the family, we're also individuals who need to remember we have to put the Lord before spouses, before children, and before parents, and before everything else. And here's why. And I hate to ever think this way, but my wife could choose to not be a Christian tomorrow, or I could choose to not be a Christian. And each of us has to be prepared to get ourselves to heaven if the other one doesn't. I have 4 children and 3 no longer are Christians. Right? I have, 2 atheists, I have an agnostic, I have 1 that comes. And I have to remember that for me, if all of my children abandon the faith, I still have to be a Christian. So you need to start thinking of yourself not just as a father, not just as a husband, but as an individual. Not just as a mother, not just as a wife, but as an individual. And not just as a child. Your parents could become unfaithful. Think of yourself as an individual. I don't fly anymore, but I do know that when I would fly, the waitress would always, or I don't know what they call them now. What's the correct term? The flight attendant would come out and say, if the door rips off the plane or if the wing flies off, grab the air mask and put it on your own face first before you help the gentleman or lady next to you, right? What were they saying? You're of no value at all to anyone else if you yourself are not taken care of and safe. And that's how it works for the Christian. I have no value as a Christian at all if I myself am not safe, in a safe position, right? It's the same idea. So yes, you're a father. Yes, you're a mother. Yes, you're a child. Think of yourself as an individual first. Your love for the Lord has to come before anything else. Matthew 12:46 through 50 is one of the passages I have you read. I'm going to read Matthew 10:34 through 37. Jesus says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth." That's the message the world wants you to believe. I came not to send peace, but a sword. What are you going to cut with that sword? Cut apart. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. As an individual, you need to place Jesus above anything and everything. Your spouse, your children, your job. It all means nothing. It all means nothing. We're not taking any of it with us. The best we can hope, because we can't even take our spouses or our kids with us, the best we can hope is that they're faithful and we see them again in heaven. But it all starts with me as an individual first. Because if we won't put Christ on first and if we won't be faithful, we're not worthy to be His disciples. But when we put Christ first, only then will Jesus view us as members of His family, and by putting God and His kingdom first, our families will benefit more. Matthew 6:33, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." The family, it's a wonderful blessing. It has its hard times. We've all seen marriages that struggle. We've seen children that struggle. But it does have, no matter what, its blessings. And when it's functioning as it should be, it has a husband and has a wife who love and respect one another, who are working together as a team to raise these children. They love their children. They discipline their children. It results in children who honor and obey their parents, who love their parents, who later kind of flip the table around and the children are actually taking care of the parents. That's the ideal model family that we find taught within the Scriptures. And surprisingly, and I'm going to go back and do the lesson like Larry wanted, the polls actually show that. The polls show that when a family is set up the way that the Bible says it should be set up, that the children fare much better. That the statistics on divorce are much better. Many of the problems that we see in the world around us, guys, for the most part, we don't really see within this congregation. We're kind of somewhat shielded. We don't have rampant divorce in here. We never have. Other than my children, we don't have lots of children leaving the faith per se. The majority of the things that in some regard that the world is struggling with, we don't apparently seem to struggle with as much. And some of the other things we do. We all have problems, whether it's financial or what have you, but the polls show that when the family is structured the way the Bible says it should be structured, the husbands and the wives and the polls regarding divorce and so forth are much, much better, and the children fare much, much better. I actually went back and looked at some of the statistics around children in jail, guys, and it's very sad. Because when you compare that to families with both husbands and wives, where they attend congregations and so forth, massively statistically different. And so as Christians, our family duties are pretty clear, whether it is we're husbands or wives, whether we're parents or children, whether we're married or whether we're single. We need our faith in Christ to cause us to be the best spouses we can be, to be the best husbands, the best wives, the best fathers, the best mothers, and the best children. That all starts by becoming a Christian. You will never meet, or you'll never reach your best in any of those positions until you become a Christian. Becoming a Christian is not complicated. I'll cite you some passages and I'm going to end. I usually quote them by memory, but I won't. All the conversion accounts were the same within the book of Acts and any of the conversions that we see. They were teaching about Jesus and who He was, and people believed that He was the Messiah. Hebrews 11:6, you have to have faith, and you have to believe that He's the Messiah, or you're going to die in your sins, John 8:24. So they knew who Jesus was. They understood about the fact that He shed His blood on the cross for the church. They understood about sin and the need to confess and repent of sin. Luke 13:3 through 5. 1 John 7 through 9 talks about that. They had an understanding that they needed to confess Christ. Romans 10:9 and 10. And in every conversion account, they got immersed in water for the remission of sins. Acts 2:38. Jesus commands it, Mark 16:15 and 16. 1 Peter 3:21 says, baptism doth also now save you. It's part of the process of becoming saved. It's not the only thing that saves you, but it's part of it. And so in every conversion account, very simple. They knew who He was, they believed it, repented of their sins, confessed Him with their mouth, as we see with the Ethiopian eunuch, and they got immersed in water. That's the easy part. The hard part is being faithful every day as a husband, as a wife, as a father, as a mother. But that's where it starts, becoming a Christian. If you're here and you're not a Christian, we would love to study with you. If you're here and you're struggling, whatever your role may be as a husband, wife, whatever that is, if there's a way that we could help you in any way, you can come forward as we stand and we're led in a song of invitation.